Welcome to the Dr. Stacy Show, where we are talking about all things faith, love, and wellness. I'm your host, Dr. Stacy, and I am excited to be kicking off my inaugural season. Each season, I'm going to aim to tackle an important theme. This season, we'll be tackling healing Black men and lifting Black boys. I'll be taking time to talk to incredibly talented and amazing Black men in their fields and profession to gain insight into key areas of wellness and how we can support with faith, love, and wellness our Black men and boys. Today, I am super excited to have on the show with me a retired police captain, Mark Benjamin. Mark Benjamin, I have known probably about 15 years personally. He has been in law enforcement for 27 years, served in our military and the Air Force for 8.5 years. He has served the community of Atlantic City with heart and passion. He served as an elected public official on the Winslow Township School Board, and as an ordained minister, he truly believes that Jesus Christ is at the center of allowing clergy to connect our communities, help young people, free them from stressors, and rebuild our communities. I am so grateful and for this opportunity to sit down with retired police captain Mark Benjamin. Mark, welcome to the show.
Well, good afternoon, Stacy. Thank you for having me, and hello to our guests that are tuning in.
Great. Well, Mark, we're going to be talking about community wellness from the perspective of policing. And I know you and all that you've done in our communities, even your work in Atlantic City. Talk to me a little bit, or talk to our audience a little bit about community policing and maybe the trends and things that you've seen through the years as a police officer and captain.
Well, let me start by saying this. My vision of community policing would be one of having our young and seasoned officers culturally competent being priority number one, then constitutionally led being priority number two, and having the ability to relate not only to our seniors in the community, but also, most importantly, my passion, as you know, are the young people. They are our future. We must pour into them to the point where they are lifelong learners, critical thinkers, and productive members of society. So that being said, I think community policing encompasses a very important part of that picture because, as you know, a lot of our young people, meaning Black and brown, come from broken homes. And as a community police officer, I think it's your responsibility, what I would call a calling, to make contact specifically with those homes and be that father figure, that sounding board, that coach, that life coach, which would help us from a law enforcement perspective break down the barriers of mistrust between community and law enforcement.
And I know you have been an advocate on the trenches of community policing and walking neighborhoods and connecting with people. Where do you see still, I guess, from the community, fear of, like, let's just say police officers walking the streets or being in the communities? What do you see and experience?
Well, what I've experienced is with Black and brown communities, again, is my philosophy is distance breeds fear and mistrust, while frequency builds the trust in law enforcement and in community relations where, in fact, they're comfortable enough to call us to thwart crime before it happens. Me and my 27-year experience in law enforcement, we were always operating behind the curve, in my opinion, because, you know, once crime has been committed, an investigation starts, photographs are taken, things of that nature, but the crime has already been committed. So we weren't on the cusp of prevention through relationship. And that's the only way you can prevent crime is through relationship. But we have a stigma, and it's internally also, where young officers or officers in general follow the culture from within, and it tends to be a us versus them, or from a community standpoint, we look to be an occupying force versus a guardian organization.
I think that's key when you're talking about relationship, and that community trust piece. And that keeps coming up as a series. And I'm talking in different spaces with Black men, that the trust of Black men in just connecting, right, through relationship, whether that's church, whether that's through medical services, anything really starts with that relationship piece and trust. You've had experience even with school policing. Talk to us a little bit about how that is maybe helping. Is it hurting our communities? Where do you see school policing?
School policing can be a linchpin and very important if you have the right officer that's able to relate to the students
Mm,
as well as the administrators. And what I mean by that is for about 6 years, I did the school resource officer thing. And because I
mhm,
had such a passion in a relationship to guide these young people and I did not fear them and I wanted to engage them, we had the ability to thwart gun crimes, gang crimes, and things of that nature by virtue of relationship, because not all young people, regardless of whatever philosophy may be out there from some certain people in positions of power, they don't want to be in that crime ridden
mm,
community either. So they would come up to us, give us a heads up what was going on, and we would pass that information
ah,
on to our intelligence unit, our juvenile bureau. And whenever the incident was about to happen, we were able to stop it, seize guns. And I think what we did in Atlantic City under my commanding officer, Joseph McCullough, who was a Caucasian man, to be specific, we went to the Juvenile Justice Commission and seeing if we can have some of these kids that were being peddling drugs or guns by adults, if we can put them into the Explorers program or a station house adjustment program where the parents will enter into agreement with us signed by a judge that the child would, one, take part in this program, and two,
mhm,
stay out of trouble for a designated amount of time. And if they failed, then the prosecution part will go forward. But if they
mm.
were successful, that would not land on their juvenile record, and thus they would not be in the criminal justice system, which is what my personal belief is what some, because all law enforcement officers are not above board. We all don't have the same moral compass, and
Mm.
some have joined to be that oppressive agent versus that guardian.
I love that you just said that, right? That not all officers are created equal, right? And so, even the idea of their heart and their mission, because we do know that school policing, the other side of it, while it can be good, people do fear that is contributing to higher incarceration rates of young Black male students. What do we need to do maybe differently with policing? How do we address the higher rates of incarceration of Black youth compared to white youth or other youth? Your thoughts of an officer, how do we change that part?
Well, we have to change the mindset internally and externally, but we also have to give these young people a safe space to express themselves. And what I mean by a safe place to express themselves, in our community, the barbershop is one. Mothers tend to guard their children per se versus educate them to the trials of life. Them being women, they can't educate these young boys as to the trials of life they're going to face as men in America. The stigma that goes with in our culture today, especially given what we're going through now, the targeting, the racial targeting. And then when you have reports from the FBI saying that white supremacist groups have infiltrated law enforcement, that
Mm,
in itself creates a angst toward law
mhm,
enforcement when it goes to our children getting driver's license and having to drive down the street and being stopped by law enforcement officers. I just conducted a interview
mhm.
for the chief of police job in Norristown, Pennsylvania, and one of my colleagues spoke on it who was Caucasian, who never understood the reality of a Black and brown parent and what they face and the fears they face from the law enforcement community.
And you're bringing such a really good point that even when we talk about like training and community training, I have a question to kind of switch gears of the training of police officers, how we interact with Black youth. Are there any trainings, for example, that officers go through in specifically like cultural awareness, cultural diversity, inclusion, equity, understanding? Like, what does that look like within a training program for officers?
Well, I can tell you that just took a foot within like the last 7 to 10 years. And the
Mm,
initial response from members of law enforcement, you call in a training agency to teach cultural competence and teach us to how to recognize our own biases, but it was met with resistance. You don't tell us how to do our job, so on and so forth. But as the paradigm shift and these young people, Dr. Stacy,
mhm,
our young people are commingling now. So that barrier of race and discriminatory
mhm,
behavior is weaning itself out, I think, from a natural perspective. However, we in law enforcement want to expedite. We want to expedite breaking that barrier down. And I think we have to give that's that safe space where the young people can one talk to each other. And I'm talking about all races in the room at the same time, because I think it comes from lack of exposure. And for example, you'll see preschoolers playing in the sandbox together. They don't recognize color, culture, or anything of that nature until they begin to get to middle school, high school, and then what they're being taught at home permeates that division. So I think bringing them all together once they're of age and begin to understand who they want to be, help them become who they want to be, whether it's race, gender, identification, sexual identification, just the acceptance will transfer into dialogue. Dialogue will bring education, and they'll begin to find out, like I found out going to the Hispanic community as a law enforcement commander, they have the same concerns we have. They only want to be included in the community. As you see ICE running around now, they're in fear, they're intimidation, because all they wanted to do was one, come to a country where they can have equal footing on a prosperous life and be included in community involvement. But in the same token, fear makes them regress from actively participating, which means we tend to lose cultural education. And I think that's reinforced by some of the stances in law enforcement currently.
You know, I was recently, my church was doing a safety training and it's multi-ethnic church, but the officer that was doing the safety training was a Black officer. And it was interesting because he said to us, even if, one of the things that you have to remember when a police officer comes to a scene, they don't know, because the question was, should we be carrying guns, for example, as church members for security teams and things like that? And they said, well, one thing you have to remember is a police officer coming to a scene doesn't know, if they're just called in by dispatch, they don't know who is a perpetrator, who is, a church member. So they basically was like, don't carry weapons, that they wouldn't advise that. Talk to me a little about, because again, our communities, we're looking at the shootings that are happening. We're looking at innocent people in these moments. Can you talk to me a little bit about police training in that moment? What do we maybe need to do different? Is there anything that we can do to get these numbers of, I'm just going to say, acts of violence towards civilians down? And when we talk about policing.
Well, first and foremost, a handgun is an anti-personnel tool. Let's be specific about that. One, you must have training. Two, you have a right to bear arms. And if you're trained appropriately, then you have that right to carry, along with your local law enforcement chief executive officer signing off saying you received the competent training and you're able to carry. But now, like you made reference to the church and its security structure, I personally would not say not to carry a weapon, but what I would say is call your local law enforcement officials and bring them in so they can give you some tips and pointers, but also make known who the personnel in your church is that is armed. So when we come on scene, just like they say, it's a call that went out, but at the same time you send a call out, you could say our armed security officer and or off-duty police officer is dressed in such and such from head to toe. He's going to be our contact person when you respond if he's available. And if he had to engage, say, an active shooter, he's not the suspect, but he's actually the shield. So that's where we have to incorporate law enforcement in just about every function, even in church, as a soft target.
One thing I thought was interesting in speaking with other officers, and again, in these moments of interacting with someone that you don't know what's going to happen next, it's kind of like that mental pressure. And we hear it oftentimes, again, in the court proceedings when the officers are questioned and they talk about the stress of the job, they talk about that moment. Is there any training that's provided for officers on that particular moment when they're interacting with individuals that may or may not have weapons?
Well, basically, we do insert what's called in-service training, interagency, inside the agency. What I think the problem we have in law enforcement, we don't like to accept the fact that we're not mental health specialists. So we kind of tend to shy away from bringing mental health specialists in because of the stigma that goes with it.
Mm.
However, it's necessary to, again, break down that barrier of ignorance. And I
Mhm.
use the term ignorance not in a derogatory manner, but in what is defined as unlearned.
Mm.
So if we're unlearned in interpersonal relationship skills, or we're so adamant from going call to call to call, and we deal with an element of society that philosophy is if they're talking, they're lying, you have to learn how to self-evaluate. So I'm not treating everybody like that or putting everyone on defense,
Mhm.
as opposed to being able to relate even in the moment. Because I'm gonna be honest with you and tell you this. I've been in some dicey situation in 27 years. And what I get sick of hearing is an officer say, I was in fear of my life, so I did this, I did that. Please don't judge me.
Mm.
But the issue is,
Mm.
and being frank, you become so hyper vigilant that things tend to slow down. And I think that's one of those key components
Mhm.
that has not been taught to the public. So if we're being open
Mm.
and honest, which you know I am, Stacy, and I don't have a
Yep,
problem
I know.
withstanding the backlash, don't lie to the community, because there's nothing worse. You can have 15 data boy moments over a 10-year period, and you had that one hiccup. Guess what? Your credibility goes down. The
Mhm.
trust factor comes in again where it's jaded. And you have to try to rebuild that every day. That's why it's so important for community policing. Because when you have that relationship, if that destructive incident happens and a life has to be taken, or tools have to be used, such as taser, riot baton, anything of that nature, the community is more apt to say, not Officer Johns. We know him, we
Mm.
know her. They come to the
Right.
cookout. We're confident enough to leave our kids in their presence. They interact with our young people. They check on our seniors, even if when they're not asked. It won't be that rush to judgment. And I think from a standpoint of us against them that has permeated law enforcement, there's a propaganda machine that begins to spin when critical
Mhm.
incidents happen. We want to reach out to the church, reach out to the clergy, but we didn't take the time to establish that relationship prior to the incident happening. I think if we do that, more of that, we will have less friction and less rush to judgment. And the community will say, okay, we're not going to judge. We're not going to have, these marches, and we're not going
Mhm.
to, call for the heads of police, defund the police, which let me break that down. The community was never saying defund the police. It was saying let's do alternative policing. For example, let's put mental health specialists embedded with law enforcement, because we're
Right.
asking these young men and women to deal with incidents that are not criminal in nature, but more mental health in nature, which we're not professionals at that. We're professional police officers.
Mhm.
So I think that's a big part of it also.
And I think that's an excellent point, that relationship with community to even support an officer when something has happened in their community, because that is what happens next, right? The community is hurt when something happens like this in the community. And you were talking a little bit about the policing, and talk to me about like PAL programs, Coffee with a Cop. Are these programs making a difference to build that relationship, a connection in your 27 years? What would you say we need to do more of? What did we say get rid of?
Well, coffee with a cop was a very good idea, but how many young people drink coffee? That's more of a thing where adult black men can come and interact with law enforcement.
Mhm.
But my philosophy in that coffee with a cop is, we say we want to hear, hear, hear. But in the same token, when you hear, what information are you giving back? For example, that same time, coffee with a cop, we should be educating the public in our use of force continuum. We don't just go to guns, because that was the given what's going on all over the country. You see it on the news media
Mhm.
frequently. Then at one point, law enforcement was saying that's an isolated incident. That's an isolated incident, until you began to get the cell phone camera. Then you begin to see these isolated
Mhm.
incidents become more frequent, and officers were not always in the right. So that jaded the reputation. You have George Floyd, who really just obliterated trust in police, because
Mhm.
that's when I think the good officers inside every department had to make a choice. That's when you see us begin to kneel with the protesters to say, wait a minute, we're human. That was murder. That wasn't
Mhm.
law enforcement. So we do stand with you in judgment of that act because it was on camera. He was defenseless. And, we had to agree with the community at that point to bring back legitimacy and trust. Procedural justice was not applied because if it was, there was no reason to choke him out like that. I mean, you had him down, you had him handcuffed, so on and so forth, to put your knee on his neck. That was overuse of force. But then, when the investigation took place, there was a whole lot of other factors that came out. But
Okay.
that's also where, because we don't have all have the same moral compass, and people tend to slip through the cracks during the background investigative process. And some may be even swift enough to get through the mental health evaluation that goes with law enforcement. So you have to be, it has to be a daily self-monitoring from within. And the leadership has to reinforce that daily and impress upon the officer, your actions will be held accountable internally, because you're one of those officers that like to operate in the gray area, which I don't agree with, and nor do I agree with. You have to break the law to enforce the law. If you're one of those officers, you don't belong in this career field.
And Captain Benjamin, you just helped some people with that and help heal some people, because to hear officers, again, even with what we witnessed since George Floyd, right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
idea that policing, and I think social media and cameras and the access we have just continues to show us the injustices. And so I appreciate you saying, hey, we stand with you on that. All right, so I want to get into a final tip. And what would you say to help heal Black men and their relationship with policing? And then what tip would you give for our young boys in this idea of environmental wellness and policing relationships with police officers?
Well, I would say, as a tip in general, remember law enforcement officers are human beings. We put our pants on the same way. We have the same feelings and emotions. But what we fail to realize is I'm not a man of excuses. I'm just not. And I'm not going to allow law enforcement officers to use mental health as a crutch to not be held accountable. That's one. Two, to the young people, I would say, in order to change a system, you have to become part of a system. A gentleman that's raised by a single mother, I was always taught, and this is something I think will hit home with a lot of young boys and mothers that are engaged in their lives. My mother always taught me, if you do a crime, you do the time. You take the responsibility for the action you did. And then once I became a military person, and her living through the 60s and all that civil rights movement and all of that, she always told me, there's nothing more honorable to me than, I would rather you be beheaded standing for truth than you bow to a lie. So with that being said, that's the reality of the matter in our homes that we have to be taught. And I think we need to bring that back. And also that goes hand in hand with, to change the system, you have to become part of it. And that's one of the reasons why I became a law enforcement officer. I was taught from a young age. I was raised in a house where, my aunt was one of the first Black Panthers. So I really knew what the Black Panther Party was about. It was about self-empowerment, community involvement, and caring for your community, regardless of what was blasted across the screen. So that being said, I was always taught to be culturally competent and culturally aware. And, that's just how we were in Norristown, because that's where I was raised at. That's how we were in Norristown, all of us. I mean, one of my best friends has been my barber nearly all my life. I look up to him. I've always had, because he was older than me, and he's always given wise counsel. And I can just sit in a barbershop and listen to him talk to other people, especially young men, and give him the counsel that we got as young boys, which just seems to be missing, but we can redeem it. And I think to become part of the system, young people, that's how you change the system and bring the education and life experience to the system, that you be the change you want to see. That would be my advice to young men and women.
Wonderful. So, Captain Benjamin, I have to do my joke of the day segment as we close
Okay.
out. Bear with me. I always tease people, these are Laffy Taffy candy jokes, so they are meant to be silly, but we
Okay.
know that humor is a way that we heal ourselves and wellness. So, ready? So, was the dolphin guilty? That's the joke. Was the dolphin guilty?
Okay.
What's your answer?
Was the dolphin guilty?
Yes. What's your answer?
Was the dolphin guilty? The
Mhm.
dolphin. I would say I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay, so here it is. Ready?
Yes.
Yes, for all intents and purposes.
Oh, okay, okay, all right. I got you. I got you.
All right. So, Captain Benjamin, how can people get in touch with you? Because one thing you didn't forget to mention is your nonprofit that you do in Atlantic City with young people. So, how can people get connected with you? Share your information quickly about that work as
You,
well.
you you can go to my Facebook page. It's my nonprofit is a youth mentor nonprofit through the state of New Jersey, which we operate in Atlantic City, Atlantic County, New Jersey. But we're also reaching out to Norristown, Pennsylvania, to try to expand on the vision that I had. So I can be reached. I give out my cell phone number. I don't have a problem. 856-553-2682. 856-553-2682. Like we do impact days, which you're part of as a partner, where you come in and teach parents parenting skills while we have the young people downstairs and have them engage the public service seniors and things of that nature. So if you need me, I'm here. Now that I'm retired, I have
Great.
time on my hands and I'm moving into the consultant portion of my life, I should say.
Oh, well, let's hope you get busy
Yes.
because you have a lot of great gems that you dropped today. And I know you personally that way too. You have a lot great to offer our communities and helping our communities heal. Well, before we go, folks, I'm going to close out with our Dr. Stacy Love the Babies Well send off. And in Matthew 22:39, it says, "And the second is like unto it, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." Loving our neighbor means creating community around our children. And as we heard Captain Benjamin say today, that we need to be the community around our children, building trust and relationship, but also creating environments where our children aren't afraid to walk up to their community police officer and ask for help. And I remember it back in the day when you were afraid to act up because even your neighbor you would be in trouble
Mhm.
with, and they'd tell your mama on you, right? So we have to
Yes.
return to being that level of community for our babies, showing them love, showing them support, but even having an understanding, even when our students and our children are struggling. Thanks so much, folks, today for tuning in to the Dr. Stacy Show. Until next time, keep the faith, love my babies well, and pursue wellness.